I'm Rachel Edidin.
And I'm Miles Stokes.
And we are the hosts of Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men, a weekly podcast where we walk listeners through the ins, the outs, and the retcons of our very favorite superhero soap opera.
We're also the co-hosts of Rachel and Miles Review the X-Men.
Which you're watching right now.
Where we talk about the X-books that come out every week.
Now, this week we're going to be handling things a little bit differently because we weren't able to post video reviews last week.
Yeah, so we are going to skip a couple of the books from last week, namely Uncanny Avengers, which was just kind of not great, and Wolverines, which was a fun issue about Deadpool, but certainly nothing hugely continuity affecting. What we are going to talk about is the final issue of Cyclops. So I say, Rachel, let's dive into that.
So as we mentioned in the intro, we're going to start with a comic that's technically from last week. That's Cyclops number 12, written by John Layman, drawn by Javier Garrón, and colored by Chris Sotomayor. This is the last issue of the Cyclops ongoing series. It's also part of the Black Vortex crossover, which is an odd ending note, although I gotta say, it's actually my favorite issue of Layman's run, and I think a decent ending for the series.
Yeah, I'm actually really relieved to hear you say that, because when I was reviewing this last week on my own, the reviews we ended up not being able to use, I was of the same opinion. I actually really liked this issue, and I was convinced you were going to hate it, and we were going to get into a big fight, and we were going to get divorced, and it was going to be the end of everything.
I mean, Miles, I'm a critic, and you grade exclusively on an effort scale, so I feel like if we were going to split over times when I held a comic to a different standard than you did, we would have been done a decade ago.
That's probably true. But anyway...
Anyway, yeah, this is a solid issue, and the thing that's really stuck out for me is that it's one of the first, and one of the only of Layman's run that's really felt like a Cyclops story, not just a space adventure with Cyclops thrown in as the protagonist. It's a story that I don't think really could have been anyone else's, and for me that's what defines a good solo book.
And we should say right here that this is going to have spoilers in it, so if you're concerned about knowing what happens in Cyclops, or for that matter in the next issue we do, Captain Marvel, go ahead and skip to the Storm reviews.
Right. So this issue is mostly about Cyclops having his, magic feather moment. The magic was inside you all along. The crazy cosmic power was inside you all along.
The ruby quartz feather.
So ultimately it's about Cyclops and Iceman, at Cyclops' advice, deciding to submit to the Black Vortex and become their sort of hyper-powered up versions of themselves.
And I love the way that happens. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about the way they get out of jail, because they start the issue in, space prison, and they get out by Iceman freezing the fingerprint of an alien guard on the bars of the prison, and then Cyclops looking at that, and then using his optic blasts to, use, to recreate the fingerprint and a fingerprint sensor across the room, and it's super space pirate heisty, and I love it.
Parker did it better with eyeshadow.
Be that as it may.
And I will also say, they don't actually go into the mechanics of this, but it seems, based on the fact that it's a fingerprint sensor, like it would have to rely on Cyclops' powers being heat-based, which they're not.
Perhaps.
I'm sure there's a way to no prize out of this, and maybe it's a pressure sensor. I'll accept it this time, I think.
But anyway, yeah, so like you were saying, it's about Cyclops basically accepting that he is going to be okay. Specifically, he's worried, with the Black Vortex seeming like the only out, becoming more powerful using it, that if he gets too powerful, he's going to become like his old self. Right,
this is a Cyclops who, you gotta remember, at 16 was dragged into the future by a freaked out beast because his adult self had gotten possessed by the Phoenix Force, gone Dark Phoenix, and murdered Professor Xavier. He does not have a great relationship to the idea of cosmic power.
Right. And so it's actually really charming because Corsair communicates with him sort of using space telepathy and says, hey, it's going to be okay, I think you're going to be all right.
Or does he?
Or does he? And it turns out that's the magic feather thing that you were talking about, Rachel. In fact, it was just Cyclops' version of Corsair in his own head, meaning he did in fact have that confidence. And that, I think, for me, is where this issue really works, tying the entire series so far together.
Yeah, letting Cyclops kind of be his own person, because a lot of the series has been him coming to terms with who his dad is. And this is kind of him stepping outside of that and figuring out who he is. And it's a surprisingly good end to this series. It's not Rucka and Dodderman. Nothing is Rucka and Dodderman, but I feel pretty good about it as an ending note. So what did you think of the Black Vortex versions of Cyclops and Iceman? Because I want to talk about that. Those were interesting.
Okay, well, Cyclops is fine and all, but I mainly want to talk about the fact that Iceman is an ice elf. He's an ice elf. He looks like he's coming out of World of Warcraft, and it makes me really happy.
He also has no nose.
It's true. I couldn't tell you why, but I will say this is just one step on his path to eventually being the Battle of the Atom Ice Wizard, and I'm all about that.
I guess. So Cyclops looks to me a lot like Guardian from the DCAU. But one of the things I noticed about his costume that I thought was interesting was a faceted red diamond gem motif, which takes me to a very specific character.
Right, got some Sinister going on there. It's
Well,
true.
and if the Black Vortex is in fact related to Apocalypse, I mean, I don't know if that's deliberate, but I do also kind of feel like if it's not, it was a really, really bad design decision because, I mean, that's associated with a very specific character, y'all.
Could be Jack of Diamonds. Remember Jack of Diamonds?
Jack of Diamonds didn't wear a red faceted gem.
Maybe if he'd gone...
red faceted gem anywhere, he mostly just had big, silly hands.
Maybe if he'd gone through the Black Vortex, he would have. We don't know. But
He's
anyway...
also died like 4 times. I mean, Sinister has too, but that's part of his shtick.
But yeah, so this is a good issue, good end to the run. Well done, John Layman.
Next up, and first among this week's comics, we have Captain Marvel number 14, written by Kelly Sue DeConnick, drawn by David Lopez, and colored by Lee Luffridge. This is chapter 11 of the Black Vortex, and there are not actually any X-Men in it.
Like, seriously, 0 X-Men.
Well, they're in one flashback. You see 3 of them. She mentions one of them.
Hey!
But, you know, this kind of has us thinking about some stuff we've been talking about between the two of us about the Black Vortex, which is that we probably wouldn't have started reviewing it if we had known just how un-X-Men connected it was going to be.
Yeah, this isn't like this isn't a big event like Avengers vs. X-Men. It's not an old school crossover like the Extinction Agenda. It's just a plot vaguely following what happens with this giant space mirror.
Yeah, I feel like the X-Men are in it mostly as a context for getting Cyclops out of his own book and back with the all-new X-Men. Man, there are so many other ways you could have done that. Like, I feel like this would have made the most sense to do as a Cosmic Marvel crossover, and to include the Cyclops ongoing in that, and then just have him end up back on Earth, or pulling the all-new into space, maybe have one crossover issue with them.
Yeah, but that said, given that this is not a book we would normally have reviewed had we but known, this is a really good issue of a series we've actually both been following on our own outside of X-Men.
Yeah, it's a book we would have read regardless, and it was a lot of fun. And you know, actually as a standalone part of the tie-in, it's a lot of fun, and it's a great character piece and a really great contrast to part 10, which is Cyclops number 12.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with Carol Danvers, which if you've read old Uncanny X-Men during the Brood Saga, you totally would be.
Also, you should totally be reading Captain Marvel now, because it's awesome. It's so good.
But yeah, Carol is, she's a really great character. She's brave and headstrong and is constantly at war between being a little bit too full of herself and trying to be humble. And all of these qualities are very much on display as this issue opens. If you were just an X-Men fan reading this without reading any other Avenger stuff, and this was your intro to the character, it would be a very effective one.
Yeah, it really would. She's also got a very interesting, complex, and long-term relationship with cosmic power. She originally got her powers from a dying Kree soldier. And later on, because of Brood intervention, turned into binary, where she basically had the powers of a star. And so she's been at the wide ends of the power spectrum, and now is finding herself faced with the same option Cyclops was in number 12, which is whether or not to dive into the Black Vortex.
Technically, it was a Kree machine called the Psyche Magnetron, but there was a dying soldier involved. It's very complicated.
Well,
don't worry about it.
I'll take your word for it.
But yeah, and what I really like is, again, spoilers here, the perfect contrast, because in Cyclops we see a character who his arc has really been all about coming into his own power and learning to trust himself, learning to trust that if he gets that power, he's going to be okay. And with Captain Marvel, we've seen previously in her series, both this volume and the prior one, that her big risk is taking on too much of a risk, taking too much power into herself to attempt to accomplish her goals, and really needing to learn to rely more on who she is already, what she has inside.
And her skills. So really, I mean, both of them are kind of trust yourself stories that land in very different places based on the specific characters, and spoiler, as we warned, she chooses not to submit. She actually gets partway in, she sees what she would become, and she decides to walk away.
And it really, really works. This is a great character moment for Carol Danvers, for Captain Marvel. It's a fun little chapter in the Black Vortex. I mean, as much as the Black Vortex has an ongoing plot, which, meh. But, you know, you could do a lot worse as a standalone issue, and if we had only been X-fans reading this, I think we would have felt very good about stumbling upon this gem.
That said, I really can't wait for this crossover to be over.
Entirely fair. And finally, we have Storm number 10, written by Greg Pak and penciled by Victor Ibanez, Al Barrionuevo, and Neil Edwards, and inked by Victor Ibanez and Ed Tadeo, colored by Ruth Redmond. That's a hell of a creative team.
And they do a hell of a job.
They really do. So this is the penultimate issue of Storm the series, since a lot of stuff is ending with Secret Wars, and part 1 of a 2-part closing arc. And I think this is handled exactly how it should be. It takes place back at the school. We've seen Storm sort of go out on her own to all these different parts of her past, and now it's just her in her current status quo as headmistress of the Jean Grey School. And as such, we see the artistic team getting to draw a ton of students and staff, and oh man, they do such a good job.
Although I think there's a continuity error on the last page.
Oh, yeah?
I'm pretty sure Quentin's not back at the school, but he's in that last scene.
Oh, well, that may be true.
Sorry.
Marvel editorial. We're watching. But yeah, this is doing what I think a last arc should do, which is bringing back a lot of the stuff from the previous parts of the arc, a lot of characters like Forge and Callisto, and really, more importantly, the themes of past arcs, which is essentially what makes Aurora Monroe, what qualities are innate to her, and what are both the bad sides and the good sides to those qualities. So in this issue, we see her find a surprising character, Kenji Uedo, who was a character from the old series Generation Hope.
And I should add, this is a story that's going to make a lot more sense if you've read Generation Hope. If this issue has a downside, it's that it's very dependent on some, at this point, fairly old continuity. And while that's a good series, I don't think it's a series that it's safe to assume that readers on this are necessarily conversant with.
Yeah, I feel like the issue should include a link to marvel.wikia.com, which is actually what I looked at to figure out more about the character.
See, I've actually read the series, but I think even just a brief refresher on Kenji's backstory would have been really helpful here and could have made it a lot more accessible.
Yeah, that being said, like I said, it is a really excellent issue, especially as part one of a two-part finale, and it really just focuses on Storm's compassion and ability to see the best in people, and how that works and how that doesn't, and I really, really like that. It's also got some great action in it. It's got some great character interaction between her and Beast and a number of other characters. I'm going to be really sad to see this series go.
Yeah, the art is fantastic. I'm going to say I rail occasionally against superheroes, splash pages of superheroes posing dramatically, but it really works for Storm.
Well, she's a very dramatic character.
She is, yeah, and she flies in ways that make it feasible to pose dramatically in the sky in ways that it might not be for, someone else. But yeah, I mean, she is all about taking it up to 11. She is, again, a woman who was literally worshipped as a goddess for years.
So yeah, good stuff. After Secret Wars, Marvel, if you're listening, which I suspect you're not, but if you are, we need another Storm series. We need this to continue. Storm needs to be a central part of the Marvel Universe for so many reasons, both narrative and demographic and idealistically and all sorts of things.
And whoever the creative team is on that series, they need to be taking a very, very strong cue from Greg Pak, all the artists on this, but especially Victor Ibanez, who just does gorgeous work, and whose Storm, especially in terms of her face, has become my definitive Storm in ways that no other really has. I mean, I think it's even actually kind of replaced Life Death Storm for me.
Yeah, I'm starting to agree, as radical as that sounds. So, Marvel, more of this, please. So that's it for this week. Rachel, what's our favorite book?
Our pick of the week is actually from last week, and that is Cyclops number 12. It's the last issue of a run that's been very mixed for us, but both writer and character really came into their own this week and gave us a satisfying conclusion in ways that I wasn't expecting, and I'm really grateful to have found. So I think it's the strongest of the three, but I also think that it's worth giving it points for improvement and for finally hitting the notes that it's been aiming for. With that in mind, what would you say is our panel of the week, Miles?
So our panel of the week is actually also from last week, from Cyclops. And I want to jump in here and point out that the sort of amber coating of the planet that gets amberized in this book looks a lot like peanut brittle, specifically the peanut brittle from that one episode of Gravity Falls.
Yes, oh god, the Quentin Tremblay peanut brittle. It totally is.
Like 2 people are going to get this, but it does.
This is going to be in my head every new Black Vortex issue now.
Well, anyway.
Like, it's for now, that world is encased in Quentin Tremblay's peanut brittle. The silliest president.
That being most importantly said, so the panel in question is actually one where Corsair, or, Dream Corsair as the case may be, is talking to Cyclops and telling him, hey, he's going to be okay, he can control this power. And just the look on Scott's face, Scott doesn't say anything in the panel, but just the set of his mouth, that sort of like almost reluctant, like, it's slipping out smile, and the way his brow is furrowed at the same time, it's just adorable.
Man, Garon is really good at cartoonishly sincere faces. And I think this is also kind of highlights something that he's done beautifully that we've called out before with regards to this book.
Yeah, so good stuff. And I just want, every time I look at that, I just go, oh, Scott, and it makes me happy. So yes, that's our favorite. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching.
If you like what you've seen here, please check out our podcast, Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men. New episodes go up every Sunday at rachelandmiles.com and on iTunes and Stitcher. What do we have for them this week, Miles?
So this week is actually the first episode of our second year of recording, which is
Whoa,
kind of unbelievable.
hot damn.
Yeah, so we decided we were going to recap every single thing we've done so far.
For those of you who are keeping count, that is 51 episodes worth of content covered in under an hour.
Yeah, so if you wanted a good jumping on point, you didn't want to listen to our previous 51 episodes, which, I mean, you should, but if you didn't...
You totally should, though, because we are obviously delightful.
Then this episode would be the way to go. So check out Previously on Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men.
Now, that podcast, these video reviews, and everything else at our website, articles, art, and more, are brought to you courtesy of our awesome Patreon subscribers. Thank you guys so much for everything you do. If you want to join their ranks, you can do that at the links either above or below, depending on whether you're watching this on YouTube or our website. We've got a few new milestone goals that we're going to be adding in soon that I'm pretty excited about, so keep an eye out for those, and, you know, on their tail, new and exciting content.
Meanwhile, we will see you next time.
We're Rachel and Miles, and we're here to do interpretive dance, I guess.
The window is mine! Well, we're professionals.